I'm here today in my den in my home. You can see one of my wife's paintings up behind me here, some seashells that she did a number of years ago. But I thought I'd come to you today from my den, and as we talk more about the new normal. When we're talking about the new normal, we're about talking about our lives, culture, surroundings being set with a new template, a new way of doing things. And my wife asked me the other day, she said, what is really new about this? And I said to her, well, it's really not a new template. God's template has been around since he created everything. So it's actually quite an ancient template in comparison to the length of our lives and the things that we know. However, at the same time, we're in a period where we're having to step into this without the benefit of generations going before us living this out. So though it's quite ancient in terms of when God designed this template of the new normal, we're stepping into it in a very unfamiliar way, a way that's unfamiliar to us. And so it's as if it's brand new. Throughout time, from the beginning of time, God created this template and he gave men the opportunity to step into it. He gave Adam and Eve the opportunity to operate by it, and they did for a while. And then because they listened to the serpent, they stepped out of it, and things went another direction. At the time of Noah, he did a complete reset. And at that time, things also went another direction. It was very few generations after Noah that the Tower of Babel was built. And then God brought a destruction to that tower, which had unified the world in a way it had not been unified since the garden. And then he brought Abraham along. And out of one Abraham and his wife Sarah came the children of Israel, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Israel. And there he gave a whole nother people a opportunity to step into it. Now, over time, some of them did, and some of them, and many of them didn't. And there was always, for generations, this struggle between God's template and the template that they wanted or that the world system wanted to wrap around them. Well, when Jesus comes, Jesus came as the second Adam, and Jesus came to show us what man was supposed to operate like. Jesus came as a man, and he came to show us how men can live in the earth and what the earth looks like when a man is living by God's template. Jesus is essentially our template. In fact, he told us that we would do greater things than he did if we would stay connected to him and move with him and with the Father in this template. Then came the church, and with the church, there were a whole host of people who once again stepped into this. They were all Jews. They brought in Gentiles. The church became Jewish and Gentile, one new man. And it functioned for a while, actually, in various places in the earth for several hundred years as the authentic people of God, living according to God's template. And by living according to his template for the earth, they were seeing God do things that you couldn't find anywhere else. But for the last 1,700 years or more, that fell to the side. And since that time, men have been moving more towards the world system template and operating by the world system, even in terms of their relationship with God. So much of what God wanted us to do, God reshaped or reformed into a normal that was a template that wasn't God's. It was a religious template. And so we're at a time now when God is bringing these things to a head. And what the Lord wants to do is establish us in his new normal, the normal that he revealed to Adam, that he promised through Abraham, that he made active through Jesus, that he expanded and enlarged through the early church and disciples, and what he wants to do in us so that we become the fulfillment and the completion. This is what the book of Romans says when Paul says that all creation, that is the things in the template, are waiting for those who are sons of God, those who share with Jesus in the inheritance of the earth. That's us. If you listen to Jesus, if you know Jesus, if you move with him as he moves, he says, then all creation is waiting to see that, because it means things are ready to operate as God designed them. This is what we're launching into in our new normal. We're learning a whole new way of thinking about things, seeing what God is doing, and learning how, through the Lord, with the Lord, by listening to him, how we're going to step into this. Because I can tell you, at the end of these 4 months, things are going to be drastically different than they are right now. They're going to be drastically different in the world around us with all the things that are happening, and there's more of that to come. But they're also going to be happening in a greater way within us. For those of you who went through the 2 months from Passover to Pentecost and begin to encounter great change, here's what I'm going to say to you. The change is accelerating. It's increasing. It's increasing because God's doing more. He's going to pour more into us and pour more out of us. If you remember at our Pentecost gathering, the first testimony from Stephanie in Hong Kong, the Lord gave her 2 choices. He gave her a choice to either be a vessel through which he would pour things and they would become full, or she could be a vessel that would pour out things. But what he said he would do if she was this kind of vessel, he would pour into her so much that as it poured out, it would still fill her up and overflow. In other words, it would fill everything. That's the template the Lord has for us right now. That's for the end of days, and this is what he's designed the earth for. So we're stepping into it now. To do that, as I've mentioned over the last couple of days, God took me to Micah chapter 6, verse 8, and that's what I'm showing you here on the screen. Let me see if I can move this screen forward. Oh. Okay, I'm having a little difficulty here. Okay, there, I finally got things cleared up. I'm learning how to do something different here, so please be patient with me. But here's the verse we looked at out of Micah 6:8. He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. We're looking at the first part of this verse right now to understand. And what we saw yesterday is God is showing us this temple, and he calls this temple good. Good is a word he used to describe creation every day after he created it. He made it so it was able to do all he created it to do. And that's what makes it good. And so God is showing us a template that is good for us to use in the earth. In other words, when we use it, everything in the earth that God has made will work with us. Whether it's his angels, whether it's the land, whether it's the trees, the fish, the air, the water, the sun, the moon, the stars, all of creation will begin to work with us. I'm not saying the world system will work with us. That will never work because the world system is there to steal, kill, and destroy. And the world system wants to make sure we never live out this template, because the enemy knows the moment we begin to live out the good as God designed it, that means the evil that he designed, the enemy designed, will be obliterated. And his end is at hand. So let me just say this. You're at a pivotal moment in history still. And over these next 4 months, we're moving in this way together. So I encourage you to stay focused. I encourage you to continue to the Lord speak to you. And I encourage you to stay on this path, regardless of how little you understand it now, or regardless of how little you can perceive it or see what's going to be like in the future. Let me assure you that over these next 4 months, this is going to clear up drastically for you. Don't be distracted by what you see going on around you. Know this, your God is at hand, and his hand is on you and your circumstances as we learn to move with him. Let's go forward. Again, we're in Micah 6, verse 8, the first half. We talked about he has showed you, oh man, what is good, and I reiterated a little bit about that. Let me also go on to the another couple of words that are found here in about this template in the first part of verse 6. He asked the question, and what does the Lord require of you? Now, there's two words I want you to notice here. The first is the word Lord. It's not just the general word Lord. It's the name Yahweh. This is the name that when Moses was getting ready to bring the people out of Egypt to Sinai to meet God, he says, God, and God's ready to send him from the bush. He says, God, who do I tell them you are? What's your name? Because in that land, especially in Egypt, there were many different gods, a god of the sun and a god of this and a god of that, and they all had different names. But what was the name that God would call himself that would set him apart from any other who might purport to be God? And God gave him the name Yahweh. Now, I know there's various opinions about how to pronounce this, how to write it. It was written with 4 Hebrew consonants that basically are YHWH. That's just a transliteration. Some people refuse to speak it. I don't necessarily feel like we need to refuse to speak it. I think we can use the name Yahweh, or some have transliterated it to Jehovah. But I think Yahweh is a good representation of this name. But this name refers to God as the God who makes covenant with people. God has another name, Elohim, that describes him as the God of all creation. But here he refers to himself as the God of his covenant with his people. In other words, what he's coming to them in Micah, and what he's coming to us saying, listen, I have this template. As Elohim, I created this template for the earth. But in order for it to operate, I come to you, you with whom I have made covenant, and I am putting this template in your hands so that it can, for you to operate, so that the whole earth can operate according to my plan for everyone. He's talking about a covenant connection with him is what allows our earth to operate as he created it. For everyone, all creatures, everyone, environment as well, all people, to be fruitful, multiply, and be full, they have to move in a covenant way with God. Now, we all know from history that isn't happening. That's not going to happen just because we tell people they need to know Jesus. This has to come from a people who realizes when God makes a covenant with us, he sets the terms. You either step into that covenant or you're outside of that covenant. And God is giving us an opportunity to understand during this period of time that he wants us to operate as a covenant people. Now, that doesn't mean that we're simply defined by the fact that we have Jesus in our heart and we believe Jesus died for our sins. That's an important part of this. But covenant describes a day-by-day relationship and what constitutes that relationship. Because in God's covenant, he sets the terms for that relationship. We don't. If God wants all of our day, his covenant demands that we give him all of our day. Yet a lot of times we just want to give him 5 or 10 minutes. And so it's a whole different way of thinking, this covenant way of thinking. In this way, God gives us choice, but he gives us choice to choose one thing. We either live in his covenant or we don't. That's how he looks at people. They either move with him or they don't. He has mercy on all. His grace is available to anyone who'll take hold of it so that they can step into this. But the promise of his covenant is for those who will receive it and move in it. And this is what he wants to alert us to here in Micah 6, verse 8. This isn't going to just happen because somebody says it's going to happen. It's not going to happen just because a prophet has prophesied it. It's going to happen because it's God's covenant. It's the way he's designed it. And he has people that he is prepared to step into that. And what I encourage you to ask yourself, and as I ask myself, am I one of those people? I believe you are. I believe that I am, because I have seen how the Lord moves over these past years in my own life. And I'm understanding more and more day by day what it means to move with him in his covenant. And I trust that you're doing the same as well. Now, the point is, we either accept him on his terms or we don't. There simply is no middle ground. We'll look at this verse later, but Jesus said, you can't serve both God and mammon. You can't serve two masters. You'll either love the one or you'll hate the other. You can't serve both God and mammon. And we've already talked about that verse. We'll talk it about again. It simply means there is only one path you can choose. If you don't choose that path, by default, you're in the other path, whether you know it or not. So this is the time for you to look at it, because one of the keys to this covenant has always been listening to him. And in the days ahead, I'll describe for you different ways God communicates to us. And in one of those ways, in one that probably holds the greatest weight, he actually speaks to us and we hear him and respond to him. This is what he establishes his covenant around. Not just communication, but actually interacting and speaking with us. So we need to realize this as we go into this new template. This is a covenant template. That covenant is not a religious word. It is an economic word. It's a contractual word. It's different than the contracts we sign with people, because in those, both parties agree to share certain things. But in this contract, God sets all the terms, and we either accept his terms on his terms, or we don't. That's how both narrow and wide this is. Because though God's covenant is narrow, it produces the widest and greatest or fullest result. It's how he's designed things to work. And it's full of him, full of mercy, full of light, full of joy, full of the good. Now, there's the second word I want you to notice here in verse 6:8a of Micah, and that is the word require. He says, what does the Lord require of you? See, since it is a covenant relationship, there are obligations we accept to fulfill in this covenant. Now, in Judaism, over the years, they developed all kinds of lists. In fact, at one point, someone told up all the laws of the Old Testament, said we're supposed to follow, and there were 600 and approximately 620 of those laws. And then Judaism took some of those laws, like Sabbath, and they evolved that one Sabbath law, keep the Sabbath, keep it holy. They took that and developed it into 1,200 other laws. And so there were laws upon laws upon laws. And you begin to think, I have to think of this, I have to do that. Everything is to do what's required of me. Well, we're going to find out what's required of us in God's template. And we're going to find that it really relates to three things that the Lord is looking for us. And these three things have some different nuances to it. But I love this. It means we only have to pay attention to just a very small number of things to move with God in his covenant. But we do need to pay attention to him. This word require means that God is carefully searching and looking at us and see if we exhibit and demonstrate these priorities in our life for seeing his template of good being fully active in the earth and in our lives and in our relationships. So I encourage you to take a look at these words today and begin to look at yourself in terms of covenant. Have you ever thought of yourself in covenant terms? We need to. Once you begin to understand what this covenant is about, then you can go through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and see it demonstrated and expressed in so many different ways, in so many different lives over many periods of years, that it will come alive to you as well. But above all, what this is more than anything else isn't an interaction with history. It's an interaction with our God now. And this is what he has for us. The earth is ready to come out of its groaning state. The creation is ready. The trees are ready to clap their hands. And that glory that God has filled the earth with is ready to rise to its surface, into the fullness, as we step into this template in our lives where we live today. Bless you.